So hi everyone, and welcome to the second Leaders of Today podcast with me, Billy Humphreys from MRL Consulting Group. Now, the Leaders of Today podcast is all about champion leaders in the sectors that we love. And I'm delighted to say that today's guest is Claire Darley, Vice President of Digital Media at Adobe. Claire, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Billy.
So first of all, before we start, I just wanted you to do a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Well, you've already told my job title. Let me put a bit of colour around that. I've got the best job at Adobe. Effectively, I get to sell our digital media products to anybody that has a need to create or tell a story. And just like you and I are doing right now, everybody has a story to tell. So I get to sell to students and creative professionals all the way up through to enterprises. It covers all of EMEA. It's really fast paced and I absolutely love it. And outside of work, I've got two kids, two boys who are 23 and 21, and I've been married for 25 years. So yeah, I've been working for a long time.
So today's podcast then, Claire, is all about you. So we'll talk about your career, how you operate, how you got to the top, any challenges you faced. But first of all, let's start at the very beginning. So the year's 1993. Teletech launch, you can book a holiday from your TV, which sounds bizarre today. Really Like My Fire, and Take That took over the charts. QVC was the talk of the town, every town in the UK, and Jurassic Park was the film of the year. And you, Claire, joined a little company called IBM. So let's start with that. So what made you kind of get into sales to start with?
Well, I think it was by accident, honestly.
Like most things.
I think, like most things, like most good things, it was by accident. I'd been studying business studies at university, and I don't know whether it's changed now, but you know, back in the day when I was doing my degree, business studies focused on the 4 Ps. I think there are even 7 Ps now, the 4 Ps, and yeah. Sales was never mentioned. It was all about marketing, about product, price, promotion, place, and whatever the other 3 are now. And I specialised in corporate strategy and marketing. And in my 3rd year, I went to do an internship, and I blagged my way into this internship at IBM. And I went to work for what was, on paper, he was called a marketing manager. Actually, that was just American speak for a sales manager. IBM, as you know, is a huge B2B company, and the weight of B2B go-to-market really is sales. So I actually effectively was working in a sales team, and yeah, I absolutely loved it. I realized that was where the magic happened, and I was totally captivated.
How did you blag your way in? I'm intrigued.
So, you know, I always tell people it's about chances, and you always have to take every chance that comes up. And I didn't go to a typical milk round university, but the girl in the year above me had a friend who worked for IBM, and she'd got an internship the year before. And because when she was coming to the end of her 12 months, they were looking for 2 more interns for the next intake, she brought that opportunity back to my university, and I leapt at it. And I tell this story quite often to people about, you know, really making the most of chances, which is, you know, IBM do rigorous psychometric and aptitude tests, and I didn't come in the top 2 spaces to get those internships. And I don't know whether I was number 3 on the list or not, but what I will tell you is I was, as I've been called, pushy, tenacious, and I kept calling, and I'd made some really great contacts during the interview process. So I kept being cheeky and calling them up. They actually offered to 2 other people. One of them turned it down, and they came straight to me. So again, I don't know whether I was 3rd in the list or whether I made that happen, but that was me sort of blagging it. And then I worked 13 months there, and I took every single chance that I possibly could to get involved in everything from events to customer meetings to project management, so that actually they would sponsor me through the interview process to get a job on the other side.
So really you stood out more than anything. So you say you kind of stood out from the crowd. I think that's testament really to kind of you as a person today. I guess it's if you do that, you are likely to be remembered by those people that matter the most.
Yeah, I think it's, there's a lot of psychology in it that says, as women, we typically say, I was just lucky. We make our own luck. And I think you're right. I think, making good relationships, making the most of opportunities, saying yes, these are really powerful things, and they increase your luck and your chances, considerably.
So you obviously stayed at IBM for about 7 years in total, where you ended up being kind of a sales leader. When you first kind of jumped then from kind of being to kind of go into that management, how daunting was that?
Well, the great thing about IBM is it's a matrix. I mean, it's over 100 years old now, so it's probably the original matrix. What that means is you have multiple opportunities to stand out, to make a difference. And I learned really early on in that organization that it is entirely possible to lead without authority. In fact, they crave that. If you're working in a large matrix organization, leading without authority is like the secret sauce to making things work. You have to galvanize people around a point of view. You have to, really pull on all of the threads, because you're not going to have everybody working for you. And I just got really used to doing that. Even literally as an intern, I got used to doing that and making that happen. And those are the things that actually, again, make you stand out. So I was really fortunate. I got given team leader responsibilities, and then, my first management opportunities actually at IBM. And what an amazing company. I mean, they invest in all of your training and development. But again, I think those opportunities to take that first step into management were because of the relationships that I had, the network that I created, but the things that I'd done to demonstrate that I could use my initiative and influence even without the authority.
So let's talk about some faux pas then. Obviously, when anyone goes to management straight away, there are a lot of things that you do where you think you should be doing it like this, and then you look back and go, I definitely should have done it like that. Is there any that kind of really stand out to you as kind of like the top things that you did back in the day?
Well, I think one of the bigger challenges that I faced right at the start was the average length of service at IBM, in those early years of me being there, was about 25 years. So wow. To be somebody who was in their early 20s, managing people who were, twice my age, that was a bit of a culture shock anyway. Interesting enough, at IBM, it wasn't about the female dynamic. There were plenty of really, powerful, icons for me to look up to. But actually it was a bit about the age and the style. So I had to modify. I mean, I think from the moment that I joined IBM, I became a blended 30, even though I was sort of 22, 23. I had to age myself somewhat and round the edges off in order to blend in and not stand out so much, because of my age. So I think, just being a bit young and headstrong, I think just not listening as much as I should. And I talk about how a really important thing is, they teach you at sales school at IBM, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that order. And I learned that, as part of my sales job, but actually as a leader, listening to understand rather than listening to reply is probably the thing that took me longer to realize than I probably should.
So I just listening to what you're talking about, I guess you were probably seen as a bit of a disruptor to the market then, from an IBM perspective, saying this, like, the service is such a long time. They're bringing in a lady that's in her early 20s. I guess that was quite a shock for people who were slightly older to be, I'm managed by a lady that's considerably younger than me. How do you deal with that?
Well, I have to say, I think the people that I managed had real grace. So I didn't so much have an issue there. I remember really clearly, though, when I was doing my sales training, they used to bring former managers in to come and do. It was a really rigorous sales training process. It lasted about 9 months, and it's pass or fail. It's like a really big deal. And some of these older guys kind of coming in, basically telling me that I knew nothing because I was so young. So I have to say, the actual IBMers of the time were very open. I think it's one of the things that I loved and still really appreciate about the culture, this wonderful matrix just allows you to have multiple points to the sun. Never are you in a situation where you only have one person above you. There are at least 4 other people in the matrix who you kind of have to report to, and that brings an openness. So it was less of it me being a clash with the current, that IBM composition, but maybe with some of the older guard who were in their sort of living in the past a little bit.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you touched on it earlier about you've now led different roles, and marketing has been a huge part of that. How did it kind of develop then? Because obviously the roles of my job, I've done marketing for 10 years. So if someone said step into sales, obviously you roughly do know what you're doing, but they're very different departments. So how did you kind of develop into that?
Yeah, I think if anybody gets the opportunity to do it, they should. Again, I go back to that business school ethos of we train people around the concept of marketing, and in a B2C world, marketing drives customer outcomes for sure. You still have to figure out the go-to-market and how you're actually going to get things merchandised and into their hands, but it's very much a marketing-led movement. In a B2B sales environment, it is all about sales. It's about relationships, about people. It's about making things happen. And I encourage anybody, while they're young enough to kind of take the bold move, to actually try both and see, because my job now, actually, I call myself go-to-market. That's the perfect description of the 2 sides of the coin of sales and marketing. I have to think about how we're going to take the products and the propositions to the customer. That includes the conversations we're going to have, or the routes to market, or the messaging, all of those things. And I was fortunate. I had a great job at Vodafone. I'd left IBM to go and help set up their global account team, which is now Vodafone Global Enterprise. But I was one of 3 people, and a piece of paper with a list of customers that we wanted to try and win. And I did that for a few years. And as the business started to scale, what I realized was I was getting more enjoyment from creating programs that had bigger impact. So things that I was doing successfully with my team, the ability to kind of take those and apply them across regions, being more customer centric, making things happen in a more programmatic way, rather than it just being what we were doing, in our ad hoc way out in our team. And so I was promoted into a new role to lead a marketing function at Vodafone to help support our business customers. And for me, that was kind of the first foray into how I describe myself now as a GM, which is the ability to be able to see across a number of different ways to talk to your customer and ways to engage with your customer, say from everything to do with the product and the proposition and the pricing, but also say all of those relationship guides. We were writing the conversation starters for the sales team. So for me, it felt really natural. It felt like a natural extension of everything that I'd been doing, but just on a bigger scale. And it was absolutely terrifying to do it when I first started, but I'm so grateful because it's given me this whole different outlook on what I'm best at now.
I guess it gets you to see the whole product life cycle from a client side and through to the customer, because I think, especially from my role being a marketing person, being a marketeer, you're the one telling the story to either the customer or to the client. So you're seeing it from both B2B and B2C, but then from the sales side, they're effectively primarily it's just B2B. So all they're doing is selling straight forward to the customer. So I guess that's amazing. I think obviously a big part of your role now is transformation, and across that for all the digital products you're doing. I guess internally, when you are doing these transformations, it's telling the team about the changes, and how do you cope with that? Because obviously everyone's very strongly opinionated. All you've got to do is look on social media nowadays. So I'm sure in an organization, when there is change of product and how you roll that out, how do you, from a management style, how do you cope with that with people?
Well, you've mentioned sort of being a disruptor and transformation. I'm glad you've got my DNA already. I would say that first of all, I actually kind of thrive in a crisis. I'm at my best sort of during challenging times, the current situation, included. I would say the things that I've learned are partly about me and partly how to do this in a better way. I'm a definitive decision maker. I'm always thinking about what's the next thing that we should be doing. It's just who I am. It's just my makeup. I like to think about what would the next best activity be? How can I connect people? How can we sequence things? But I'm fundamentally, really collaborative. Excuse me. So the way to bring all of those naysayers in is to be really open, bringing people into the process, getting them excited. And I know that's easy to say and really difficult to do, but actually it is far easier to take people along the journey if they felt like they've been part of it. Nobody likes being changed. We always say people don't like change. I think that's wrong. I think they don't like being changed. They like to be, to have this sense that they're partly in control. They're having a say in this. So being part of that, and actually having this clarity of being able to paint a vision and help them to see the sequencing and the next steps is really key. I'm not the best at the detail stuff, but I absolutely can do that big picture stuff, and I have to have a really amazing team around me to make sure that the details, really, really happen, behind me. And again, that's probably, if you're going to be transformative, you need to make sure that you're not just painting that picture, but you actually got people who can follow up.
No, completely. I think as well. I think it's, if you've got salespeople that have been, or anyone in the organisation that have been through that, the decision making or how the change is going to look, surely when they then sell the product, they're more invested because they feel like it's a part of them and they've been included in that change. So that's a huge part. So would you say that's from your IBM days in terms of the business school that taught you to be like that, or is that just kind of it's always been ingrained in you?
I think there's some things that are fundamental to my character. This idea of having a clear idea of what the next right thing to do is something that is about me. I have many great conversations with my husband about this, who likes to calibrate every decision. I just like to decide and then move, and then decide and move, and then and that's one of the joys of having differences of opinions. So that sort of clarity about the next step, and being able to make it happen, comes from within. The training and the experience that I've had around the outside has been around, it's not enough just to do that. You have to show people what you're doing, over communicate. Again, things that we see on paper, over communicate, actually really sort of, talking to people. And you can't talk to everybody. If you're running a 3,000 person organization, you can't literally consult with 3,000 people, but there are always culture makers in organizations, and they're the people that you really need to bring alongside, making sure that you've got a much wider leadership team that can be taking your message out to the troops is really key.
So talking about your management style then, how has that developed, and kind of has it changed? Are you still the same Claire when you're a manager back when you started at IBM, and have you tweaked along the way, or?
I think, like many women in business, I have had labels like pushy and bossy, thrown at me and in my direction. Certainly in my early years, and I probably was all of those things. It's always exacerbated by the bias that comes with being a woman, in any sort of business world. But I would say I've mellowed on that. That's for me now is this idea of having, decisive, leadership and actually understanding where to go. But I think, in terms of the sort of the mellowing of the style, I asked for help. I think in the early days, I would have probably tried to have done it myself. I remember sweating for hours trying to figure out the absolute perfect plan, territory plan and commission structures and how to make it work. Actually now, the idea of doing that myself, I know that I'm probably not best placed to do it. So asking for help is a strength and not a weakness. I personally always need to bounce my ideas off somebody. So that's a really important part of the way that I compose teams, that I can have people that I can do that with. I recognize that I am brilliant with a deadline, so having to either self-impose, not very good at that, or having people around me self-impose deadlines on us so that we actually get things done is really really key. But I think the thing that's consistent is, don't settle. Probably in the early days, actually, I probably did settle because you kind of concede. But actually, if you're challenging your teams to think about something different, right now we're challenging ourselves to go, what can we do to make a difference, during the current pandemic? And not settling is a great thing. You should be going, no, we need to be thinking bigger. And I think, I always had grand ambitions, but I think when you're first learning, you probably concede a little bit more. Now I get to go, no, we need to be way bigger than this.
I think as well, I think you touched on it about we asking for help. And I think when you've reached a management level, that's the biggest thing, because you don't want your peers to feel like you don't know the answer. You're in that position for a reason, but if you are unsure, there's that doubt on you. I think a few people have actually said that. I think that's a huge part to play.
Honestly, I tell anybody, you are promoted. You're promoted to, create a sense of cohesion and vision and clarity, but you're not an island. You're not an island. There are plenty of people, and the importance of having coaches or mentors, even if they are not in your immediate team, having those people around you in your corner, fundamental.
So when you hire people for the leadership team, do you look for people that have traits similar to yours, or do you look for people that go, this is not a strength of mine, so I know I need to hire someone who is better at that than me? Because it's the interesting kind of side of the coin.
Totally the latter. I think there's a lot of research out there that talks about how networks are created and how networks are formed of people who are like each other. It's one of the things that as a champion for women's networks, we're always trying to break it, because it becomes the clique. And I think it's also the trick to leadership. If you hire the same guy or the same gal, you're going to get the same outputs. So no, my leadership team is completely diverse. We all have fundamentally different strengths, and I create a structure that allows me and the rest of my team to make the most of it. So we have very clear sales roles, and then I have it sort of surrounded on either side through really sort of real strength in sort of commercial strategy and operations that sort of pull the discipline together. And we're all different, but one of the things that it has to be common is, we have to be able to work together. And I've noticed something. I've noticed that when people come and join the team, they're almost wrong-footed at first. This idea of collaboration and we all win when we all win, not the individual, is not something that exists in every organization out there. And it's actually quite interesting. We try and be unpolitical in our approach. And so I will constantly be saying, hey, have you spoken to that person or to that person, to try and bring a different point of view? And I can see people in the first sort of 6 months being really challenged by that, which is, I thought that was like my job and my thing to do. And it's like, no, I really encourage it. I think it's really powerful. Even if they've got nothing to do with your job, if they have a very interesting point of view, you should always talk to them.
And also, like, go back to the point about you talk about with the transformation, if you're speaking to such a wide group of people, no matter how small the input is, there's still input from that department.
Completely.
I think as well, and also a team that are identical robots, that's not a culture, is it? Like, culture's made by different personalities, and that's how companies are made, I guess.
Totally.
So you touched on it earlier. You're a huge advocate for kind of women in the industry and championing women. I think we've been speaking for about a year about looking to do things, and we finally got you on this podcast. What a bit of advice would you give to women who are kind of in that stage where they're ready to leap to that senior management stage, but there's barriers there that they've got to push through, or they don't know how to do that. What advice would you kind of give them?
I would probably say the same for men and for women, with a very small tweak, which is, if the opportunity presents itself to do something more, regardless of your gender, do it. You know, you will never lose from it. Even if it's something that you actually realize you don't enjoy, you will have learned something, you will have taken an opportunity. There is one fundamental difference typically that we see manifest itself between men and women, which is men are much more likely to say yes to that opportunity. Even if they think it's not for them, they're much more likely to take it, whether that's a promotion, a new role, or adding something into their current portfolio for the breadth of experience. Women are more likely to wait to be asked. And so, you know, one of the things I'm constantly trying to challenge is, if you want to be asked, you have to be in the arena. That means you have to be noticed. You have to write a development plan. You have to. Everybody has to write a development plan, not only about what you're going to achieve during the year, but what you're going to work on. What development area do you really want to focus on? Feedback's really good here. So if you can have done a 360 or got some calibration around, you know, what your brand is versus what you think your brand is, those things can help you. Remember, you can't change everything about yourself. In fact, it's really difficult to change anything about yourself. You can only really make your strengths better. And it's much easier to focus on your strengths than trying to develop something completely new. Having said that, you know, leadership and taking any role to the next level is about a few things. Clear decision making, as we've talked about. High EQ. I mean, EQ is you know, it's a game changer, and it's also a career limiter if you're lacking in it. And clear communication. Those three things, I think, are probably the pieces that I'm constantly challenging, you know, everybody, including myself, on every day. And I think they're all things that you can work on. You know, I heard one person tell me once that, you know, you can't learn EQ. It's like learning to be funny. Well, I think you can learn to be funnier. You might never make it as a stand-up comedian, but you can certainly be funnier. You can certainly, you know, treat it as a muscle and train it. And I think it's the single one that's really worth the effort. To understand the impact that you have on others is fundamental. So women, go for it, please. And men as well.
Yeah. And you know, it's such an interesting point. I remember reading somewhere that men will apply for a job, I think it's 60% of the requirements that they can fill, fine. But a woman would go for it only if she can fill 100% of the tasks.
Yeah.
So, no.
Yeah. And what that does is it creates inequalities, but in ways we have to compensate for them as leaders. So we have to be the ones that actually reach out into our organization and pull people through. So rather than, you know, say somebody's sitting there thinking, oh, maybe not, we're actually having to come and sort of tap them on the shoulder and say, please apply for this. Even if you're not successful, it's a good thing. I think the more work we're doing around unconscious bias as companies, you know, more broadly, the better that's becoming. Though I think, you know, when I look back to my career and things that, you know, potentially, you know, lessons that I would learn, you know, bias isn't a bad thing. To have bias is just to be human. It's just the way that we were brought up. But the more work we can do as individuals to understand our own biases and those self-limiting behaviors that as women we have, which is we want to wait, the better life becomes for everybody. It means that we as leaders can be more open about the opportunities and pulling people through. And as an individual, I can understand when I'm getting in my own way from actually taking an opportunity.
So how would you say you've seen a lot of differences with, we talk about your management style, to the kind of the generation now, kind of in their 20s? Has it changed a lot, how they manage people? I guess like social media is a massive part, and has that played a part in how people manage people, or?
So, you know, as what am I? I'm a Gen X mother of millennial children. I've been learning firsthand, you know, the differences that the generations sort of go through when they think about their work. You know, I know both my kids, you know, want this notion of having sort of the portfolio life, and they want to make sure that they're giving something back and making a difference in the world, and they've got to have something that's like super creative as part of it. You know, not every job's all sunshine and roses all day of the week. So I'm always trying to say to them, it's about light and shade. You know, it's about balance. They've just got to experience that for themselves. So I think, you know, as a, you know, firstly as a leader of Gen Zs and millennials, you know, we have to make sure that we're making the environment as acceptable and as comfortable for them to be able to get in and make a difference. And for those guys as leaders, I think, again, it's about us doing the same thing in reverse, which is having them understand their particular biases and understanding so that they can actually be more accepting of people around them. Go back to my time at IBM managing people who were twice my age. You know, you can't just come in as yourself. You have to recognize that there is a middle ground to play here, which is, you know, how do you communicate? How do you make things happen? And that comes from, say, that seek to understand first.
Has that changed the approach from a recruitment side at Adobe in terms of having those kind of the millennials who they want something back, in terms of the people sitting on the other side of the table? Has it made, because like for me, I'm 33, so I'm kind of in that millennial age, and when we're doing interviews with people, they do ask what is it in for me? Like, what's the bigger picture? And I think you go back to IBM days, I don't think those questions would have been asked in interviews. So the interviewees wouldn't think like that. So I guess, has that evolved from the recruitment at Adobe?
Oh, massively. And it's not just an Adobe thing. I mean, I've had the great fortune to work for some amazing companies who don't only, you know, do a great job in their day job, but actually do a great job for the community. I was really fortunate. I got to go to the World Economic Forum at Davos earlier this year. Can't actually believe I did all of my traveling in January.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
Who knew? And what was really fascinating about this particular Davos was it was focused around creating a cohesive society. And what that really means is putting stakeholders ahead of shareholders. And when they talk about, you know, corporate stakeholders, they're talking about their employees, they're talking about the community in which they work, they're talking about all of their incoming suppliers, and recognizing that, you know, we corporates have a platform to be able to make a bigger scale change than we ever would have thought, and we have to prioritize purpose over profit. And I totally drink the Kool-Aid. I have to be honest. I came away like really sort of, you know, razzed up about this idea that we could make a real difference. And I think that that's been sort of a thread that's kind of been in my career for the last few years. It's either manifest itself through women's networks, or, you know, I worked at O2, and they had this absolute ethos and philosophy under Ronan Dunn, who was the CEO at the time, around it is perfectly okay to do well through doing good. And that means that you know, if you're doing good in society, it is okay to be doing well through that. And he would only ever talk externally about impact to people and planet. He wouldn't talk about the network. He would talk about the impact that network's having on society. And Adobe is just like that. You know, we have had, right from the inception of the organization, of the company, you know, Chuck and John, our founders, had this amazing sense of wanting to create a company that they would want to work in. And that didn't just mean having like-minded individuals around them creating this culture, but actually the ability to give back. So we have a huge focus on you know, creating change out in the external world that we absolutely talk to everybody about through the recruitment process. But internally, you know, we really rally behind things like inclusion and diversity. And I say it specifically that way. For me, inclusion is key here. It's that notion of wanting everyone to be their authentic selves, to bring their full selves to work, And we run that under the banner of Adobe for all of our networks, from the women's networks to the LGBTQ networks and a whole raft in between, are driven by the employees. It is an entire movement under this Adobe for All banner, and it is making a difference. One of the things that was talked about at Davos was, when would women achieve pay parity globally? And we achieved it globally in 2018. That's the kind of company that Adobe is, and we absolutely talk about it. And we're now sort of setting the bar for ourselves even higher, which is, okay, so we did that, but really, what about opportunity parity? So when I mentioned before this idea of networks, and networks are made up of people like me, or whoever's network it is, how do you create opportunity for people to either move up or horizontally, and how do you measure that? So we're sort of setting the bar on that. We're really leading the pack in terms of how you would actually create the right set of metrics and manage that through. So you can't have an interview without talking about that kind of stuff. It's fundamental.
Your segment leads on lovely to my next question, where obviously like Adobe for All, it's a huge, like it's a global event. Was it like 3,000-4,000 people in the US together? So obviously it's like workplace diversity, you're championing different cultures. In terms of from like future leaders, are you implementing anything to do that as well, and really shout about that to everyone else?
So internally, those kind of events are fundamental to help us, open the eyes to the next generation of leaders about what leadership actually means. We have a new, actually, we launched it, inside the last 12 months, a new set of capabilities, which I personally love them. They're the sort of words I would have picked myself. I was part of the committee, so that's not just a plug for myself, but I love them. And we talk about being creative, being focused, and being a leader. And those things really mean being creative is about, being a disruptor, not settling for the status quo, constantly looking for the next best thing to do. But being focused is, well, we use data and we use insight to help us identify really which ones of those are going to be the biggest ones. And then being a leader is this idea of, managing across the matrix, really making sure that we are communicating well, leading across the silos and bringing stuff together. And we put those into packages for aspiring leaders, and specifically for women, we run a couple of global initiatives. One's called the Women's Executive Shadow Program, where we take cohorts of women and we tie them up with senior leaders across the world to spend a day in the life of, or a couple of days in the life of, and actually they come to literally access all areas meetings, from one-to-ones right the way through to customer meetings. And we run something called Leadership Circles, which is specifically for women. So it's on top of what we do with our, Leading at Adobe series. And Leadership Circles helps to specifically address some of the self-limiting behaviors that women, tend to exhibit. So, prioritizing themselves, thinking about their development plan, making sure they've got clear communications.
So not a lot then.
One or two things. What can I say? I told you I had the best job in the world.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. So obviously across your career, you must have worked with lots and lots of different people. Are there a couple of people that stand out as like being real inspirations who have helped mold you into who you are today? They've been a mentor, for example, or?
Well, I think, this sounds like I'm at the Oscars or something. Probably the biggest inspiration for me really was my mom. She had to leave school at 15 to look after her younger siblings. But she never let that stop her. She's always had to work a number of jobs. She's always been involved in the community, active, with the local council. She was Lady Mayoress for a while. And she is always somebody that, she shines really bright. She really sort of shines bright in the community. And, you know, her wisdom, you know, it still lives with me. I mean, she's still with me, she's still with us, but, you know, every day something will come to me. You know, she'll say things like, smile, it confuses people, and you know, and I take those things into my life. So she really sort of was my biggest champion and my biggest cheerleader, and I still sort of hold her up as my beacon for shining really bright. But I would say, you know, I think that what people need, you know, every person needs when they first join an organization, is to see somebody that kind of looks like them, reminds them of themselves, so that they can sort of anchor onto that. And that's at all levels. That's not at the senior level. It almost feels unattainable. So actually, when I go back to my internship, I met two women actually. When I worked there, they were older than me. One was 7 years older than me, one was 14 years older than me. And they were both women, they were both blondes. One of them actually was from my hometown, and they were like achingly cool and just ridiculously smart and living their best life. And I knew right then that I wanted to be like them. It was something that I'd never considered. I grew up in a small industrial town in the north of England. I'd never worked in an office, let alone working for a multinational corporation like IBM. And suddenly I saw this entire new world, and I saw role models that were within my grasp. And, you know, I'm still friends with Jane and Maggie now, all these years on, nearly 30 years on. And they to me really set me on the path, because I saw people that I could aspire to.
And how important do you think it is to have people to have mentors now?
Oh, massive. Massive. I touched on this before, you know, mentoring and coaching, and they're different things, are important at every single stage of your career, not just at the beginning, you know, but actually even now, you know, for me, they don't have to be, mentors don't have to be more senior than you. They just need to have a different point of view to you. Coaches are best when they are really good coaches, and I'm absolutely passionate about people being really good coaches. You know, I'm really fortunate that, you know, we have training programs internally, but a number of my staff have actually gotten themselves accredited as coaches as well, which can help you unlock a particular situation or challenge that you're facing in. And I think that all of us should be using mentors and coaches at different times in our careers and our lives. Think about it, the idea of asking for help becomes really daunting, you know, if you don't want to seem weak. So go outside of your current network and go and talk to somebody else about it. Yeah. You know, get a different point of view. You know, have a coach literally hold a mirror up so that you're solving your own problems. There's real power in that, and you know, they've definitely helped me. I've had coaches and mentors along the way, and I mentor a lot of people now, and I get as much back from those sessions as I give, because it's you can always learn in every conversation.
I think people worry about having to ask, like you said, it's people feel like the person they want to ask, like if they look up to somebody, they feel like that person's going to be too busy and they won't want to spend the time. But I always say, what you're going to lose, just ask them.
Yeah, exactly. What could the worst they can say is no. And typically people don't say no. They really don't. I limit my mentoring sessions now to 6. So I only do 6 sessions, and I leave it up to the mentee to drive the cadence of those. So if they want to do them, you know, every month for 6 months, or they want to run them every 2 months for 12 months, that's up to them. If they wanted to do it every week, that might be difficult, but you know, I leave it to them to kind of be the driver. So if they're not driving it, I'm not going to drive it for them. And so I try and establish sort of a rules and a sort of contract, you know, with them almost at the start, but, yeah, before we get into it, try and figure out what it is that they're working, you know, what they want to work through. I think there's a third role that we haven't talked about, which is a sponsor, and a sponsor is different. A sponsor has to be more senior than you. You're not going to see them as frequently as you may do a coach or a mentor, but they are somebody that's going to have your back in the moments that it really counts. I always tell people, It's not your boss that gets you promoted. It is all the other people that sit in any sort of talent review and calibrate. And you want as many sponsors around that table as possible who are advocating for you, you know, in that moment. So relying on one person isn't enough. So figuring out who the influence circle is, and actually making sure that you're delivering projects and programs that are on their radar is really key. So yeah, you can't really go and ask people to sponsor you, but you know, if you deliver programs that make a difference, and you know, going right back to the start, you stand out, and you have impact, that'll pay dividends.
Do you think you've done that over the years? And again, like you said, from your DNA, you come across as that person who is driven to stand out and try and get input from other people, so they all feel part of that kind of team.
Yeah, I would say yes, but I would also say that good things don't just happen to nice people. And doing your job and just being yourself isn't always enough. You know, you have to almost like stretch that muscle and work that muscle a little bit further. So when I was going through the process to get promoted to BVP, that's a really big deal. You know, it wasn't just going to happen. And I knew that I had to not just deliver my job. And I think it's in everyone's minds, which is, oh, look at me, I have this great job, I'm doing a great job, I'm nailing it, isn't it amazing? Good things are going to happen to me. You have to do more than that. You have to be networking like a dream. You have to be telling people what you stand for and the programs you're working on, not just the quarter that you delivered. You have to be super clear about that and really deliberate about it. You have to go way beyond your remit. So getting involved in corporate social responsibility or doing external events or things like this, you know, mentoring somebody else, those things actually show you as a really well-rounded individual that isn't just about them, but you're actually giving something back. And especially in a company like Adobe, those things really matter.
Sure, yeah. So talking about that then, obviously, when you reach that VP level, so like you said, it's a big deal. Like being a VP is amazing. What happens next? Like what is next for Claire? What is that goal?
Oh goodness. Well, let me just say the first thing that actually happens when you get to VP is your expectations of yourself and everyone else's expectations of you literally go through the roof. Yeah. So first of all, you know, there's that bit that says you have to really nail it again. So whatever you thought you were doing really well, you have to up your game like 10x. So you know, I spend more of my time now lobbying up around the big things and then connecting with people in my team to understand what's going on versus actually sort of running the business. You know, I've created a bench of amazing talent who are really great at running the business. And so for me, the next is, how can I make that bench as strong as it can be, giving them more opportunities to do more of my job? I mean, frankly, you know, the more of my job they're doing, the more opportunity I have to think about what the next big challenge is that's coming and, you know, be taking us over here. So I couldn't tell you about what the job is. I think every job that I've done, you know, over the last, you know, 20 years has always just evolved because it's about that ability to see what the future is going to hold and actually to be on the front foot with it, making sure that we're delivering the best experience for our customers possible.
Okay, so on that then, over the 20 years, what is the one thing, is there one thing that's like stood out as that you were like, this is unbelievable over that 20-year period?
Oh my God, probably on a daily basis. Let me have a little think. It's kind of hard. There's so many, for me, there's been so many sort of pivot points. You know, say from that look of getting that first job, and I say that again with a little smile, the look of getting that first job to, you know, coming third in my sales school and being the youngest to pass. I'm not the youngest now, but in history at the time I was, to getting my first leadership job. These were like really important inflection points. knowing when to take opportunities to leave, to be able to take a chance on something else. I've had roles and times in my past where certainly it's not matched with my ambitions or my values, and realize I've made a mistake. They are equally as important to learn from. You just have to get out of them really quickly. But right now I feel like there's so much potential. Digital transformation is what lights me up. We're in a really fascinating time in, geopolitically, where digital is fundamental to how we communicate, how we're shopping, how we're transacting, how we're trading. So I don't want to just ride the wave. I want to make the wave. So my energies and my focus is about how we can be even better at where we're at. So that wasn't really an answer to your question, but
it was. To be fair, there's a lot. I think the answer is there's a lot, so that's fine. Okay, final question then. You've kind of touched on this already, but is there one bit of advice? I know you've mentioned 3 or 4 bits, but what is the one bit of advice to anybody who wants to take that senior leap to kind of senior leadership?
Say yes. Take advantage of every opportunity, and make those opportunities if they're not arising naturally. Remember that leadership isn't just about getting your boss's job. That would be very dull. You'd be waiting for somebody to leave in order to get that. So own it. Own your own destiny. Write your own development plan. Don't think about the next thing as a promotion necessarily. The next thing could be taking a project, leading across, adding something to your development. But don't be passive. Your career is yours, and you're the only person who cares about it as much as you do. Nobody else does. It's all about you.
Brilliant. Well, Claire, thank you so much for being today's guest. It has been absolutely fascinating learning about your 20-year career in multiple different places, different functions, and I look forward to kind of hearing about more stuff that Adobe are going to be pushing out over the next few months. Have you enjoyed it, Claire?
I have. Thank you very much, Billy. That was great. Yeah.
Welcome. So, all our listeners, thank you so much for listening. Keep an ear out for the next couple of weeks, because our next episode will be very soon. We'll see you soon. And Claire, thanks again. Thank you.
Cheers.